So I'd like to welcome you to the panel discussion part of the program. And before I do that, what I'd like to do is to briefly introduce each of our panelists, starting from my right, your left. Andrew Bocarsly is currently a professor at Princeton. He conducts research in electrochemistry for chemistry, solid-state chemistry, and fuel cells, and has developed alternate energy solutions involving processes and materials for photoreduction and electrode production. And next to him is Marcus Gibson, is the director of the Princeton Initiative in Catholic Thought, a new academic program that aims to sponsor and organize a wide variety of high-caliber courses, lectures, seminars, and other offerings related to Catholic thought. And then next to him is Hans Halvorsen, is the Stewart Professor of Philosophy at Princeton, where he specializes in the philosophy of physics, logic, and the foundations of mathematics. And finally, there's Greg Hammett. He's a principal research physicist in the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, and he teaches in the graduate program in plasma physics and the program in applied and computational mathematics at Princeton. And his research focuses on the study of turbulence and fusion and astrophysical plasmas. So to begin the discussion, I've asked the panelists to consider a couple of quotes, and you've actually had them. One of the quotes by James Jeans, you just heard it before. And the first is by Einstein. His name comes up frequently in this room. We find that everyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that some spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe, and one that is vastly superior to that of man. And then, according to the well-known British astronomer James Jeans, the stream of knowledge is heading towards a non-mechanical reality. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than like a machine. So those are a couple of quotes, and I thought that what we'd like to do to start this discussion is to just go down the table, starting from Andy, to then put you on the spot, to have each of the panelists just give some impressions on what they think about this. To what degree does it perhaps give them a sense of transcendent? Is there any relationship that it has to your conception of reality, or anything really that, since this is part of the theme of this conference, comes to mind? And just say a few words, we'll go down, and then we'll start the discussion. So Andy, please.
I'm going to point off by simply stating that I feel like a real minority in this group, and that I think I'm the lone chemist. So I think something that, first of all, has motivated me for a long, long time, the reason I became a chemist in the end, is this sense of awe when looking at nature. And that comes from outside and inside. So I think in terms of, Einstein had to say in this quote, it's hard to avoid, for me anyway, that sense of awe no matter what aspect of science I'm looking at. I think it started off for me back when I was in high school, and for the first time saw a truly dark sky. I grew up in Los Angeles, and that time full of pollution, and eventually got out to a high mountain peak and saw all those stars in the Milky Way that we heard about earlier. And wow, it shows you there's something bigger than you there. There's awe built into it, and it doesn't look at all random, I have to say. And that continued all the way through graduate school and my research career. Every time I learned something, just a little thing new about how our universe is constructed, there's a sense of awe associated with it. It's really neat, it's clever, it's amazing. Well, I think that's my response.
So Marcus?
Certainly. I hope that I can respond to the prompt of these two great remarks from Einstein and James Jeans with another observation which I was recently struck by, and which I think would be, putting it in conversation with these would be one way to bring out some of my own thoughts on this, coming, with my background, having been not in the sciences, but in philosophy, and specifically the philosophical tradition of the ancient Greeks. So this is from Freeman Dyson, the physicist and mathematician who was a professor here at the Institute for Advanced Studies here in Princeton from 1952 to the end of his career. He says, to me, to worship God means to recognize that mind and intelligence are woven into the fabric of our universe in a way that altogether surpasses our comprehension. Mind and intelligence are woven into the fabric of our universe in a way that altogether surpasses our comprehension. And I was really struck by this because it resonates a lot with how I myself came to fall in love with philosophy in relation to my own Catholic faith, deeply enough to persevere from high school all the way, through my PhD here before you today. It speaks to me of the wonder, the desire for knowledge, for the truth, the love of the quest for understanding, which I discovered in the philosophy of the Greeks and in Plato and in Aristotle. Together with my experience at the time, as a high school student, as I was reading these great ancient texts, of a sense of gratitude at the opportunity that I had to even be thinking about these things and asking these questions and having the opportunity, the means, the resources to do so. And on the basis of that experience of wonder and gratitude, asking myself, well, what am I going to make of myself? What should I do with these great opportunities? How should I apply myself? And that was, I guess, my own way of having that Socratic moment of, wondering, I should examine my life so that I can make the best of it somehow, so that I can make the most of these opportunities. And that's led me, again, down the path of, seeking the truth with the help of these great interlocutors, these great texts from the Greek tradition, in ways that I have found, at least, to be deeply congenial with religious faith. But I'll just close my remarks by introducing one more specific philosophical line of reasoning, which many of today's conversations have suggested to me, and I can expand on that later in the conversation, but I'll just leave it here. This idea we find expressed in Freeman Dyson and in many other scientists who have been alluded to today, this idea that mind and intelligence are woven into the fabric of our universe. How should we understand that? How should we unpack that? Let's scratch at the surface there. One thought, one reaction, one way of elaborating that idea, which I'd like to speak up for as someone trained in the Greeks, would be to recover or to reconsider the idea of form, the concept of form as in the role that it played in classical Greek metaphysics and epistemology. Roughly the idea that the same entity, the same reality is responsible both for what things are in the world we observe and for what makes them knowable. I can expand on that as our conversation unfolds, but that, I think, is a promising starting point for thinking about how philosophy, science, and faith all converge along the same trajectory.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the one other famous tradition of philosophy, I'm going to have a couple of critical or dialectical comments to make about Einstein's claim. And the first thing is that actually Einstein's claim is false. So Einstein says that everyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that some spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe. That's false. That's not true. Okay, so what should we think Einstein is saying here? And I would propose that what Einstein is saying, he's not making an empirical claim, because it would just be a false empirical claim. He's actually making some kind of normative claim here. Einstein is saying anyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science should become convinced that some spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe. So I think we just need to consider more closely what kind of claim Einstein is making here. And I think that leads to deeper philosophical questions in general about the role that religious or metaphysical presuppositions play in the practice of science. So the open question would be, I would propose, is does one need to presuppose that the universe is intelligible, and even more specifically, that the universe is the creation of an intelligent God in order to, with integrity, practice science? The second thing I'll note is that Einstein's attitude, as best we can tell today, was actually undermined his own practice of science. So Einstein made brilliant discoveries, discovered the special theory of relativity, the general theory of relativity, Einstein never came to terms with quantum mechanics. Until his dying day, he said quantum mechanics can't be the right theory. Now, 100 years later, actually this next year, from the official discovery of quantum mechanics, we still think there's something fundamentally right about quantum mechanics. But quantum mechanics is not intelligible in the way that Einstein demanded a scientific theory should be. So this poses actually a challenge to the idea that we can just expect nature to manifest itself to us in a way that we find to be intelligible. Okay, so I put these points forward as discussion points, as philosophers I think are supposed to do. So I hope they will in the end be constructive and not just come across as critical.
Thank you. Great. First, I'll say that I've really enjoyed this conference. Wonderful speakers and great to think about these things. I think a lot of the things I've been mulling over. I was asked to fill in for somebody who couldn't make it just a few days ago. So I mostly do equations and computers, and now I have to use my works. So that's hard. I think there are YouTube videos of Jennifer Weissman's giving similar talks. So if you missed it, or if you're interested, you want to review that, I'm sure you can find some great things she said. A number of the speakers said things that I was thinking about saying, but now I don't need to anymore. The quote from Psalm 8 is wonderful, and I think that's an interesting point. That this conference is about what do we learn from science, maybe about God. And here is this song written 3,000 years ago, probably by a shepherd, looking up at the night sky. The heavens declare the majesty of God. There's something that all of us can relate to, without necessarily a lot of scientific background or questions. Right. I'll also mention this conference is very broad. There are speakers from a very wide range of viewpoints where we won't all agree on some of the things that have been said. I did want to put in a plug for a podcast, an interview between Ezra Klein interviewing Ross Douthat a few months ago. You can find it on either of their websites. And at the end, Ross Douthat, they're both columnists for the New York Times. One is a believer, one is not. At the end, Ross Douthat puts in a good plug for Stephen Barr's book, Modern Physics and Ancient Faith, if I remember the title right. So I also encourage listening to that. I found it interesting. My wife found it interesting. A few of our friends had recommended it. Ross gets into, that there are more things on heaven and earth that are dreamt up in your philosophy. And so he talks about there are unusual things that happen in the world occasionally. But he draws some cautions, talks about some possible dangers, and interpreting some of these, we need to be careful. So I encourage you to listen to his viewpoint of that. In terms of the main theme, is there something that we've learned from our field that has affected the nature, how we view reality, what we think of the nature of reality? And quantum mechanics has been mentioned a lot. I'll say that something similar to that is chaos theory. I teach courses on plasma turbulence and fluid turbulence, and as part of that, chaos theory explains a lot of dynamics and processes that go on in nature and weather, long-term motion of the planets, of various things, and understanding the difference between, on short time scales, we can predict things that are very regular, the eclipses, solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, and yet and we can predict the weather for the next few days quite accurately now. But on a long time scale, a month from now, if you want to predict whether it's going to rain at noon in Central Park in New York City, you can't do that. You would have to know where you've all heard of the butterfly effect. You would have to know where all the butterflies are in the world flapping their wings in order to predict if it's going to rain at noon a month from now.
Sometimes it's misunderstood. No matter how hard the butterflies flap their wings, they can't make it snow, in the middle of July. So there are certain macroscopic forces going on. There's some things that are predictable and some things that are not. And I've wondered about that. What is the role of that in reality, in the world that we live in? Is it a way in which, if we didn't know the consequences of our actions, how could we ever be held responsible for them? And so there's a certain amount of predictability that I know if I do this, this is going to happen. And yet, if it's all completely mechanistic, what role is there for, if my actions are just because of what I ate this morning for breakfast, what role is there for free will? So these questions of human responsibility and free will, it's a deep question that Calvinists might bring up, but I'll leave that aside for right now. I think one other aspect of this is related as well to quantum mechanics, the level of fundamental probability, and what is the collapse of the wave function? Is it a myth? Is there something mechanistic that goes on in there? I don't know. Is it human consciousness? That's an interesting discussion. But I do wonder, both in chaos theory and the limits to predictability, and in quantum mechanics, another way that probability arises in the world, uncertainty. Is this the way that God's hidden hand moves in the world? That God can continue to direct not only early on in the process of creation, but continuing today. And why does God choose to hide his hand often? We believe that he sustains the world, that there's an ultimate plan that he's directing towards, and yet we can't, we don't be. Somebody should have invited him to this conference. There's some deep things going on there. So I've really enjoyed this conference, and have enjoyed listening to all the speakers. So I'll be in.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate what all the speakers, the panelists have said. And I think that one of the reasons why we have this conference is precisely because I think in all of our own ways, we brought up the kind of tension that comes about, that then makes this conference so compelling and interesting, but also the subject of a lot of discussion. To pick up Andy saying that he saw wonder in the universe, but then to bearing on other questions, as Hans has brought up, why is it that then people don't see it? And then we're talking about, why is it that then people don't recognize trends all the way through in human thought throughout history? We see it, but then why do others don't? And then I think that's why I particularly like what Hans was saying, in terms of then saying, well, maybe the ultimate expression of that tension is Einstein's inconsistency. And so giving that, what do people think about all of this? Is it part and parcel of why we're here and discussing it?
In partial disagreement, maybe, partial agreement with what Hans said. Several years ago now, I had someone I consider a friend, another chemistry professor, come and visit here at Princeton. This is Henry Fritz Schaefer. He's a quantum chemist. And he was here to talk part about his quantum chemistry, but in part about his strong religious belief, his Christian beliefs. And there was a small group of graduate students that met with him. And one of the students asked him, so as a Christian, do you believe that you are a superior scientist to other chemists who aren't Christians? Kind of an in-your-face question, I suppose. I was trying to figure out, how is he going to answer this question? And his answer was, no. It's sort of your answer. Look around. There are lots of chemists in the world. They're not all Christians, and they make all kinds of wonderful contributions. So it would be false to say that, if you don't have this particular religious point of view, you can't be an excellent chemist. It doesn't pass the test of looking at the data. But he said, on the other hand, once I find something that is new and novel and interesting, it further enriches my understanding of who God is. And I find that to be the amazing part of all this, that I gain a little bit more knowledge of who God is by doing the science that I do. And perhaps that's part of the answer to the question you posed.
Hans?
No, I'm very sympathetic to that view. I mean, I came across with a sort of strong counter, but I think it's my sense is that's the interplay. But my sense is that's because I mean, now I'll have to be a little theological, way out of my depth. I'm just going to say things that I think are part of the Christian tradition. Is that God wants us to be a participant, right? We're not supposed to be forced into, we're not, the wonder just strikes us and we are completely without will involved. We're not involved in the process. No, actually, we have to be a participant, choosing to find, to see where the signs are, so to speak. And so I think that sits well with my theological sense.
Right, and I love what you just said.
Yeah,
I like one.
yeah, that's great.
So Marcus, from the point of view of what you talked about, how does that fit into?
Certainly. On the ambivalence, or the successive, let's say, non-religious or non-theistic scientists. One reaction one could have, which it wouldn't be a complete response, but which I think is suggestive, is the thought that here's an analogy. One of the signs of a truly well-orchestrated party is that the host disappears into the act, so to speak. The fact that one can make so much progress into the world, understanding the world, reconstructing various aspects of the world's order in the language of various fields, without once having need for recourse to theological language. One reaction to this phenomenon would be to say that's precisely part of what it is to say that the world has an integrity and intelligibility of its own, which, to invert to broadly biblical language, is as it were spoken or articulated into being by a creator. So again, it's not a knockdown response that simply eliminates the sorts of concerns that non-theistic inquirers have, but I think it's part of the picture. And in anyway, it was prompted by this last exchange.
Sure. So we are, in a sense, very informal. So we've made a few comments. You've heard what each of the panelists have said, and perhaps this might be an opportunity if I could get some assistance from some people who can move microphones around. Maybe, having heard what each of the panelists have said, open it up to any questions that the audience might have for any of the panelists.
Maybe while they're setting up, I'll add one. This reflection that I think in the development of science in Western civilization, I think it has important Christian roots in seeing that there was a God who created the world in an orderly way, that it wasn't warring gods fighting against each other, and also a certain amount of humility about, yes, God reveals himself to a certain extent in nature, but there's some things that human understanding is fallible. And so in science, we've developed systematic ways to study nature, and we know that we can fool ourselves very easily. There's been a lot of superstition that affected human life for centuries, and part of science is developing systematic ways to test, which things are good to eat, which types of bridges are safe to walk on. These are the kinds of things that I think have, in some sense, a Christian foundation of humility about human understanding and willingness to test ourselves, and appreciation for God's world.
So at this point, are there any questions for any of the panelists? Okay, we'll start with you, and we'll go over to back. So, in his book, To Explain the World, the physicist Steven Weinberg, a familiar character on this campus, makes a very big point. Himself an atheist, incidentally, makes a very big point to the fact that modern science owes its existence to the High Middle Ages, when there was the introduction of Aristotle's writings was condemned in Europe by Bishop of Paris, an enormous controversy ensued, Thomas Aquinas being, etc. And Weinberg considers that controversy and its outcome, and the outcome was that truth is one, and there will not be two interpretations. And he makes that conclusion because the exact same controversy had arisen in Islam 300 years earlier, and it was resolved on the basis of the theologians who insisted that because the entire society was based on power and couldn't risk a counter source of truth that might destroy the polity. That seems to me to be a very, very strong underwriting for, especially by a guy like Weinberg, for the idea that somehow believing beforehand that you will find the answer is absolutely essential to finding the answer.
Anybody want to take that? Let's see. Hans?
The idea that truth can't contradict truth, you might think of that as a commitment we make in advance, or as an idea.
Closer to the microphone, please.
The idea that truth can't contradict truth in general, whether we're talking about a putative religious truth, a revealed truth, or a scientific finding, or truths delivered by any other academic discipline, you might think of that as something taken on faith, or a commitment that we make in advance of inquiry, right? It's something that can be confirmed in each individual case, but that doesn't add up to a total proof that in every case a truth won't contradict truth. That's striking to me as a commitment that's consonant with if you like, a baseline kind of faith in the successive human inquiry in the face of the world. And it reminds me of some of the thoughts that I had been developing in reaction to the themes of this conference as well. I alluded earlier a bit to the idea of form in Greek thought. I'll just put it like this. It's striking that the world should be as cognitively friendly as, in fact, it is, or as it seems to be. Why should the human mind and the world we observe come together in such a fruitful way? That isn't an argument by itself, but I think it's the start of an argument, at least for the fitness between, let's say, the scientific enterprise and the philosophical impulse on the one hand, and openness to or commitment to the idea that somehow, I'm going to speak in the broadest possible terms now, at the foundation of things, or in the origin of things, we find something like an active intelligence, an active mind, which articulates or expresses itself in the knowable world, in the world that we observe. That's what your remark provoked in me. I'm not sure if there was more question there, or if you were bringing the Aquinas and Bishop Tempier to our attention. Great. Thank you.
Go back.
So when I think of science in religion, I can only help but think of Descartes' maxim of cogito ergo sum est. But the full quote is dubito ergo cogito sum est. I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am. And I think of doubt and mystery sort of mingled in together there, which are foundations of science and our faith. So I was wondering, in your practice as scientists, but also in the practice of your faith, how does doubt and mystery inform each, and how would you connect the two for your lives?
You look like you're about to say something.
Yeah, the real scientist. Speak.
As a scientist and as a chemist.
As a chemist. I should take one step back and tell you a little bit more about me. So I follow a Protestant Christian philosophy. I'm Jewish. So I mixed my Judaism with my Christianity, which can sometimes take me a little outside of sort of the classic Greek understanding of how things evolved. But there certainly is this idea of interaction. So when I see my science, I've already mentioned I see God's action in the world around me. There's a number of different thoughts and approaches that one can take to that. It's often not the case that there is a direct line between an observation that's made and the final understanding of that observation. And that gives rise, I think, to the tension that you're talking about. And so it's more of a process as opposed to a prescription, I would say, for how one goes about doing things. I don't know if that illuminates that at all or not.
Jennifer, how do you?
Oh, okay. Jennifer, just come down.
From the
Thank you. Okay, so my head is exploding of all the information and thoughts and stimulation of the day, which is wonderful. But as they talk about God and science, push you up to ask, which God? What God? What do you mean by God? But the God of the Bible is intertwined with the concept of love. And it's reminding myself of this New Testament passage that says, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. And St. Paul went on to say that if you do all those wonderful things, but you have not love, you're nothing more than a clanging cymbal, that you're just an annoyance. So could that apply to science somehow, that if we're not doing science with some aspect of or thinking about, if we're thinking about God and science, we're not thinking about a God of love or service or some way interspersing this idea of doing science in the way that promulgates some aspect of love, is it worth what? So I would like to know your thoughts on that. Or is it all just so brazy? Is this all just sort of irreparable intellectual discussion?
I'll say something. So my freshman year of college, I was a bratty teenager, cynical, and just hanging around a group of other freshman kids. Said we were asking, what do they want to do? What were they majoring in? One kid was a pre-med, and I made some snide comment about, you'll make lots of money, or you're only going to do this because you'll make lots of money. And He said no, when he was 6 years old, his younger sister was in a car accident, and the surgeons saved her life, and ever since she wanted to be a doctor. He wanted to be a doctor. And that's always stuck with me. And, as I've gotten to know more doctors and nurses and scientists and engineers, almost all of them go into these fields to try to help other people. And I think that's a reflection of part of human nature, that we are supposed to love, that we find our meaning in loving others. And that is the motivation for a lot of scientists. Yes, it's fun to just study as pure science, to just study the stars. But often there's some other applications or things that come along as part of that we are trying to help other people through our work.
Well, with God is love, I think that's a great way to end this panel discussion. And so I thank the panelists